I wonder, so, okay, you mentioned like, okay, that sounds like, that sounds sort of extreme when you're talking about like you're a terrorist or you're wanted in another country or whatever the case is, or wanted in this country for that matter. So I think people are like, for me, are like, going, of course, we should be investigating these people and prosecuting them to the highest level of the law, right? What about, like, who else is doing this? Like, when you get into these investigations, who else is committing this type of a fraud? Like, are there just, again, lower threat, lower level people that are just trying to get by? And I mean, do you run across that, and how frequent is that?
Yeah, there have been plenty of those. I'm trying to think of some examples that I could give. I mean, I did have a case recently that was not necessarily the passport application fraud, but it was misuse of a passport. So someone who had come to the U.S. by stowing away on a ship from, I think, Burma, borrowed a passport from a friend to go back and visit family there.
Okay.
And I wouldn't lend my passport to someone else, but this person decided to. And neither one of these people had a criminal history. It was poor decision making, but so very, very low level in terms of like a victim. No one's identity was stolen. It wasn't a mob boss trying to evade capture. So there are things that are not quite as involved. We investigate them. We determine what happened. The case gets closed. It ultimately, something like that may not need to be prosecuted. But the larger ones a lot of times can overlap with the FBI or HSI. We end up, because we also investigate visa fraud, people that are coming to the U.S. by being issued a visa from a U.S. embassy or consulate in another country. They're saying, I'm going for business or tourism or something, and they allege that they have a legitimate reason to come to the United States, and then oftentimes that is not true. There's some sort of fraud or false information in that, and the visa fraud can often tie in with human trafficking.
Okay.
People are told they're going to come to the United States and they're going to work, but then once they get here, their passport is taken, and they may be living or working in very substandard conditions against their will. And sometimes the sex trade is involved, and really horrible things that people fall victim to. But we partner with other organizations to try to dismantle those things and use our global reach and the information we have access to through the visa process to ultimately determine who is in charge of this scheme and to arrest them and bring them to justice.
Okay, so that brings me to some other questions. But before I ask those, where does this turn up? Like, how do these people get caught doing this? Because are they being caught like in transit as they're trying to enter back into the country, or like, where does this turn up? Like, how do we discover this person's got a false passport?
That can come from all kinds of places. So the one that I mentioned where the guy borrowed a passport, it was the Thai authorities as he was transiting through Thailand that, they held up the passport and they were like, this doesn't look like you. And then they did some more digging. The U.S. Embassy in Bangkok sent an investigator, and they worked together with the Thai police to determine what was going on. So sometimes it's at an airport where people are being inspected and scrutinized in that way, and their documents are being checked. A lot of times it is through the passport issuance process. So when the passport is received, there are all kinds of checks that it goes through, and there are fraud prevention managers that are on the lookout for certain cues where things don't line up. And nowadays, with a lot more stuff being computerized and different databases being able to talk to each other, we are identifying fraud where someone may have been living under an incorrect identity for their entire life.
Oh, interesting.
And it just was never caught in the past because we couldn't run a search and match for that biographical information against all death records.
Gotcha.
And now all of a sudden these things are popping up, and it's a current case even though the fraud began a really long time ago. So it can be identified in a variety of ways, or we get referrals from other agencies. They're like, hey, local police did a search warrant here, or with the FBI, they did a search warrant and they discovered a bunch of counterfeit documents and maybe equipment to make false passports. So there's a whole mess of ways that we can find out that something needs to be looked into.
So when you obviously you find this out, there's an investigation, and then ultimately the goal is to apprehend and prosecute. So there's a apprehension piece, which means a warrant needs to be written, a warrant needs to be served. So is DSS handling that entire process as well?
Yes.
So we have agents in the field that are actually serving warrants and knocking on doors, kicking in doors, if necessary, that kind of thing? Or do they farm this stuff out?
So we do serve our own warrants if it's appropriate. Now, if it's something that there's a threat analysis process that we go through, and if it's something that appears to be really dangerous, this person is a known convicted felon, known to be violent, known to have weapons, then we are going to work through our partners to make sure that this is handled in an appropriate way. And our agents may support that, but they may not be the first one in the door. Because typically it's the field office or resident office that has the case that is leading the arrest. So our agents are all fully trained on how to conduct room entry tactics and how to do arrest techniques, and we have the authority to do all those things. But when you compare that to a local SWAT team where this group of people trains only for that,
they're serving
together,
warrants all day, several a week or several a month.
It's really important to use the appropriate kind of intelligence analysis to determine what is the best way to execute this. But we have agents here in our San Francisco field office that are out on search warrants and out on arrest warrants. And yeah, that's something that we do. We're actual badge and gun and handcuff carrying force.